August 6, 1945, began like many others in Hiroshima. It was a clear, sunny morning. People awoke early, some headed to work, others to school. The war had not spared Japan from hardship, but Hiroshima had remained mostly untouched by the frequent American air raids that ravaged other cities. Its residents had no idea they were living in a city that had been selected for destruction unlike any seen before. At 8:15 a.m., a B-29 bomber named Enola Gay released an atomic bomb, codenamed Little Boy, over the city. It exploded approximately 1,900 feet above ground, unleashing a fireball with temperatures exceeding 7,000 degrees Fahrenheit. In an instant, much of Hiroshima vanished. Tens of thousands were killed instantly. Many others were burned, crushed, or irradiated. The blast wave shattered buildings, uprooted trees, and flung debris for miles. Fires erupted throughout the city, forming a firestorm that engulfed anything still standing. Within minutes, Hiroshima was reduced to a scorched wasteland. Those farther from the epicenter suffered grotesque injuries. Skin sloughed off in strips. Clothing caught fire. Entire families were vaporized, leaving behind nothing but shadows burned into walls. Survivors, those who would come to be known as hibakusha, wandered through the ruins, stunned and severely injured. Many headed for the rivers, hoping to soothe their burns, only to collapse in the water. Bodies floated downstream. Children cried out for their parents. The city's medical infrastructure had been annihilated, leaving no capacity to respond to the overwhelming need. 3 days later, on August 9, 1945, another atomic bomb, codenamed Fat Man, was dropped on Nagasaki. This bomb was larger but less efficient due to the city's hilly terrain. Nonetheless, the destruction was catastrophic. Urakami Cathedral, once the largest Christian church in Asia, was destroyed. Nearly 40,000 people were killed instantly. Tens of thousands more died later from injuries and radiation. In Nagasaki, too, survivors faced chaos. Fires raged uncontrollably. Hospitals, homes, and schools were turned to rubble. Priests, dockworkers, students, and mothers alike were caught in the inferno. The city burned as news of Hiroshima's destruction was still sinking in. The sheer magnitude of destruction in both cities was beyond comprehension. Yet even as the Japanese government attempted to grasp what had happened, they hesitated. The unprecedented nature of the weapon led some to believe Hiroshima had been an accident or exaggeration. But there was no mistaking the second blast. Both bombings were carried out as part of a strategy to end the war quickly and prevent a costly invasion of Japan. For the Americans, the decision was framed as necessary. For the Japanese, the cost was unfathomable. For the world, a threshold had been crossed. News of the bombings spread rapidly. In the United States, there was initial celebration. President Truman announced the success of the atomic bomb as a triumphant scientific and military achievement. But as the weeks passed and images of the devastation emerged, the public began to understand the weapon's horrifying power. In Hiroshima and Nagasaki, those who survived lived through a nightmare. Radiation sickness killed many who had escaped the initial blast. Skin lesions, internal bleeding, hair loss, and weakened immune systems plagued survivors for years. Medical knowledge was limited. No one truly understood what had been unleashed. In the immediate aftermath, families searched desperately for missing loved ones. Photographs of lost children were posted on shattered buildings. Makeshift shelters were erected. The Red Cross and other organizations tried to offer aid, but the needs overwhelmed every resource. The day the bombs fell marked more than just a military turning point. It marked the dawn of the nuclear age. An age in which humanity had created the means to destroy itself. An age in which the line between victory and annihilation blurred. In the silence that followed the roar of the explosion, the world began to reckon with a terrible new power. The day it fell was not just the end of two cities. It was the beginning of a new and uncertain world. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki marked the beginning of the nuclear age. But for those who lived through the destruction, it was the start of a different battle. The struggle to survive and rebuild from ashes. In Hiroshima, the days following August 6, 1945 were consumed by chaos. Fires still raged across the city, and a dense cloud of smoke hung in the air. Survivors, many severely injured, searched through the debris for family members. Some carried their loved ones' charred remains. Others buried the dead in hurried, shallow graves, or cremated bodies on makeshift pyres, choking back sobs amid the acrid smell of burning flesh. The hospitals that had not been destroyed were quickly overwhelmed. Medical staff worked without proper supplies. There was no electricity, no clean water, and hardly any food. Bandages were fashioned from bed sheets. Iodine was spread on wounds where no antibiotics could be found. Most doctors were themselves injured or dead. One surviving surgeon later recalled operating for 3 straight days without rest, his hands blistered and blackened from radiation burns. Radiation, still a mystery to many, began to claim lives days or even weeks after the bombing. Survivors who had escaped without apparent injury began to suffer strange symptoms: nausea, hair loss, bleeding gums, fevers. No one understood what was happening. It seemed as though the city itself was poisoning them. The same devastation unfolded in Nagasaki just 3 days later. Fires from the explosion tore through neighborhoods, consuming everything in their path. The famed Urakami Cathedral was flattened. Schools, homes, and hospitals lay in ruins. The death toll mounted quickly, and the horror that had gripped Hiroshima spread anew. Despite the odds, survivors, now known as Hibakusha, began to rebuild. But the social consequences of the bombings lingered. Many Hibakusha faced discrimination. Rumors spread that their radiation sickness was contagious. Employers hesitated to hire them. Women, especially, were shunned in marriage because of fears they might bear deformed children. Nevertheless, many Hibakusha became powerful voices for peace. Some traveled the world, speaking about their experiences. Others founded organizations to support survivors or lobby for nuclear disarmament. Their courage and testimony became essential to the anti-nuclear movement. Meanwhile, Japan's leaders wrestled with the decision to surrender. The emperor, breaking centuries of imperial silence, made a radio broadcast on August 15th, announcing the end of the war. For many Japanese, it was the first time they had heard his voice. The words were formal and poetic, but the message was clear. Japan had lost, and peace was now the priority. The surrender brought an end to the fighting, but not to the suffering. American occupation forces arrived to find cities leveled and people broken. Aid began to flow, food, medicine, supplies, but it was not enough. For months, survivors lived in temporary shelters and orphaned children wandered the ruins. In the long term, Hiroshima and Nagasaki transformed themselves. Monuments were erected to honor the dead. Museums were built to educate the world. The Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park, with its haunting Genbaku Dome, became a symbol not only of loss but of resilience. Each year, peace ceremonies are held, where survivors and dignitaries gather to call for a future without nuclear weapons. Globally, the bombings changed the way nations thought about war. The Cold War arms race began soon after, but so did the movement to ban or control nuclear weapons. Treaties were signed. Organizations were founded. The memory of Hiroshima and Nagasaki became a moral anchor, a reason to fear the power humans now possessed. The aftermath of the bombings, then, was not just physical or political. It was emotional, spiritual, and deeply human. The people of Hiroshima and Nagasaki rebuilt not just cities, but an enduring legacy. Their pain and perseverance became a warning to future generations. Never again. What followed the flash of light and fire was not just destruction, it was determination. A refusal to be defined by death. A will to rebuild, to teach, and to live. The aftermath was the beginning of a message still echoing across the world. The story of Hiroshima and Nagasaki does not end with ash and rubble. It continues, whispered across generations, echoed in treaties, and remembered each year in solemn silence. These cities, once obliterated in mere seconds, now stand not only as reminders of loss, but also as beacons of hope and perseverance. In the decades that followed the bombings, Hiroshima and Nagasaki rebuilt. Homes rose from ruin. Streets were paved where fire had once scorched earth. Survivors bore their scars into adulthood, raising children, speaking at schools, and building lives from what remained. Where devastation had once ruled, trees bloomed again. Peace parks replaced ground zero. The memory of August 1945 shaped how humanity thinks about war. The world saw, perhaps for the first time, what total destruction truly looked like, not just from above or on a battlefield, but in the eyes of children, in the silence of survivors, in the empty chairs of families never reunited. For Japan, these memories became the foundation of its post-war identity. A country once driven by militarism turned inward, reflecting on the costs of ambition and the values of peace. In schools, students learned about the bombings not with bitterness, but with purpose, to ensure it never happened again. Globally, Hiroshima and Nagasaki became watchwords. Politicians referenced them in debates over arms control. Artists painted them into their work. Writers turned to their stories in novels, poems, and songs. The cities that had once vanished became part of the moral landscape of humanity. Yet the world still holds its breath. The nuclear threat, though tamed by diplomacy, has not vanished. Stockpiles exist. Tests are still conducted. Nations still argue over deterrence and defense. The lessons of Hiroshima and Nagasaki remain urgent. Not because we fear repeating history, but because we must choose not to. Every year on August 6th and 9th, as bells toll and paper cranes are folded, the world is invited to remember not just the bombs, but the people, the mothers, the children, the teachers, the soldiers, the dreamers. To remember that peace is not passive. It is an act of will. In the words of Hibakusha, in the quiet corners of rebuilt schools, in the memorials where flowers are laid, there lies a challenge to us all. Never again. Let the shadows cast in Hiroshima and Nagasaki light the way forward, not into darkness, but into understanding, compassion, and peace.